Hello and welcome to the special on the print. As you're aware, the G20 foreign ministers meet was held today. It was a busy day. The traffic in central Delhi for the least was chock-a-block with all these leaders coming in. India was playing host to leaders from the foreign minister from China, from the US, from Russia. And interestingly, this was a full day event that was held. There were a lot of bilaterals that was held. And so what we are asking today is what are the big takeaways as far as this G20 foreign ministers meeting is concerned. And for that, I have with me two distinguished guests. Of course, I have with me Ambassador Mohan Kumar. He is the Dean Professor at the Jindal Global Center for the G20 Studies. I also have with me Ms. Swasti Rao. She is the Associate Fellow at the MP IDSA. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
So to begin with, my first question to you, what according to you is the biggest takeaway as far as this G20 foreign ministers meeting is concerned?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. No, I think the biggest takeaway is that the foreign ministers have been able to come up with an outcome document. I was just checking. The last time the foreign ministers met in July in Bali, there was no outcome document, and the Russian foreign minister Lavrov walked out in a huff without listening to what others had to say. He said his piece and walked out. So in that, if you apply that criteria, I think it's better than expected. But I think the fact of the matter is, Snehesh, I think the Indian presidency of the G20 just got a little bit more complicated, frankly, because I'm somewhat surprised, intrigued, and concerned that in November, all the leaders agreed to certain formulation, about the Ukraine conflict, the impact on economic and social factors for countries which are less privileged. And suddenly we find the finance ministers of China and Russia dissociating themselves from what their presidents had decided in Bali. And again, I haven't been able to take a look at the outcome document. I don't think it's been issued yet, or maybe it was issued. I haven't been able to take a look at it. I suspect it'll be the same. So to summarize, I think better than before, we have an outcome document, and the External Affairs Minister is right. A number of areas have been highlighted, but I think I see some dark clouds on the horizon. We shouldn't underestimate the challenge that the Indian presidency is going to face in terms of the Ukraine crisis impacting on the rest of the G20 agenda.
Well, that's a very important remark that you've made, that it is better than what happened in Bali. But then, as you rightly mentioned, there are dark clouds that are out there, and we cannot underestimate that. Before I ask you further questions on that, Ms. Rao, what, according to you, is the biggest takeaway as far as this G20 foreign ministers meet is concerned?
Snehesh, thank you for having me. Good evening. Well, I think the Ambassador Kumar has also said perhaps the same that I would like to have said too. But see, Ukraine has unleashed an intersectional global moment for India's statecraft in terms of how India is managing different desiderata, etc. But at the same time, it is an inflection point. And what, in my opinion, it is showing is that there is a bifurcation of the geopolitical world order. And what makes it more complicated is that this bifurcation has not yet crept into the enmeshed economic interests of the major players. And this makes even lesser sense when you talk about the global commons and that affect collective humanity. And that is what you're dealing with at G20, right? So you basically, what we want there is that we need some sort of a sustaining structural response to those global commons, right? But at the same time, I think, like Ambassador said, that this was never expected to be very smooth. I think some friction was always expected. Let's also remember that in November last year, from there until now, things have changed a little bit. A lot of water has flown under the bridge in terms of, the war in Ukraine reaching its first anniversary. And if you remember, those two important pictures of the president of the United States standing with Zelensky and, Wang Yi standing with President Putin, it kind of shows you that things are a little intensified, since November at least. So this is perhaps reflecting in what is going on at the G20 too. In terms of my key takeaways, perhaps what caught my attention was that, of course, Blinken and Lavrov met for the first time after the war started. And it also suggests, I was reading some analysis on it, it suggests that US does want to keep some channels of communication open with Russia, and particularly around the New START also. If you remember, last time President Putin was addressing National Assembly, he kind of made an ambiguous statement about suspending participation in the New START, right? So I think this signals some sort of a US, interest in that. That said, I think the US was also very clear in rejecting what the China peace plan was like. I think there was a lot of talk, hue and cry on the 12-point peace plan that was advanced by China. And then I think also on the sidelines that India and China met, there seems to be some thawing, right, between the tensions in between India and China. So I think those are things that we need to watch out for. But also, since I cover Europe so much, I was really interested in what the German stand, for example, on this entire issue was like. I think the German Chancellor Scholz was also extremely critical, right, against Russia for doing what it is doing in Ukraine. And it is interesting because Germany and France are looked upon as two powers which do not really want to completely isolate Russia in Europe. So I think those are things that are happening. I'll just conclude by saying that, you see, in this entire year, India is going to have at least 200 meetings, etc. 3 meetings are going to be very, very important. One was the finance ministers and governors of central bank, which happened at Bengaluru and which could not really come up with a joint communique. The second is this one that we're having now, the foreign ministers, and the third would be the leaders outcome summit in September. So I think we have to work towards some sort of a convergence when it comes to a joint communique. But just because we don't have a joint communique doesn't really mean the G20 is not doing its work, because if you look at the other work, there is a lot of work and a lot of ground they are covering.
Perfect. You've got a point there that find that a joint communique didn't really come out, but there's a lot that is happening. Ambassador, before I ask you the question, viewers, please do send in your questions. We'll be taking live questions. I'll not be answering the questions. Send in your questions for Ms. Rao and Ambassador Kumar. They would happily answer all your questions. So if you want to know what G20 is or what are the other elements of G20, the outcomes, please do send in your questions. Ambassador, you've spoken about Russia. Has the whole Russia-Ukraine issue hijacked the G20?
Hijack may be too strong a word, but I would agree that it's casting a shadow. I refer to dark clouds. There is no getting away from this issue. 2 things that I want to underline is that the G20 communique, even in Bali, said that G20 is not the forum for resolving security issues. So really, I don't think the G20 forum is going to be used to put forward a proposal to resolve the Ukraine problem. But the G20 communique in Bali also said, we recognize that the Ukraine war and security issues can have profound economic and social implications. So that is the kind of situation that the G20 is grappling with. I think there was no outcome, there was no consensus document after the Russian intervention in Ukraine. Trouble, in my mind, started in 2017 when President Donald Trump established an unfortunate precedent when he told the G20 leaders, make it G20 -1. I'm not going to subscribe to your paragraph on climate change. Until then, the G20 was in a good habit of doing everything by consensus. So 2017 trouble started. Bali Declaration is interesting. While everybody agreed, most people have overlooked the fact that paragraph 33 of the Bali Declaration, which talks of debt forgiveness, has an asterisk which says that one country dissociated itself and no prizes for guessing which that country was, China. China was not ready to go along with the debt forgiveness for the lower income, middle income countries. So we now have Snehesh a habit of G20 saying, listen, this is the document, but not everybody is going along with it, whether it is 1 or 2 or 3. In my view, it's unfortunate because there is no question that if it is a joint statement by G20, then the statement has the entire weight of 85% GDP, 60% population. Just the fact that the UN Security Council is so paralyzed, you can say the G20 document is really representative of the contemporary power realities in the world today. So it's distinctly unfortunate that we have got into this habit now of people saying one country or two countries don't associate themselves with a paragraph. Having said that, I go back to your question, which is, yes, the Ukraine conflict will loom large on the Indian presidency. I think we have to get used to it.
Okay. Sir, Mr. I have a question coming in from Rahul, and he's asking something which which we have spoken about. And his question is it a failure that we could not come out with a communique? I think we as in India, I think what Rahul means is India. Is it a failure on India's part?
Well, I think this is precisely what we've been trying to explain and understand, that first of all, the core agenda for a G20 is not to tackle with the political or security issues in the world. The core agenda, the core objective of the G20 is to better the global financial architecture and to come out with the structural solutions, like I said, to avert banking crisis and financial crisis. And that is why, like I said, that one must understand that the structure and the working of the G20 takes place by two parallel tracks, which is the finance tracks and the Sherpa track. And I think the viewers need to understand that some of the key achievements of the finance tracks in the post-pandemic phase, right? And I underscore the post-pandemic phase because ever since I think the last G20 at Indonesia, India has been a part of the Troika. So I think that kind of underscores India's participation there as well, that there have been debt service suspension initiatives, there have been common frameworks for debt treatments. Beyond that initiative, there's been a G20 sustainable finance roadmap, etc. So, those kind of things are extremely important. Then there are different working groups for both the finance tracks and the Sherpa tracks. And then there are different engagement groups, which look at a whole host of things, like, for example, how to tackle the global hunger, global poverty. And I'm sure the viewers may be knowing that there's so much emphasis on, for example, the role of millets in solving, the global hunger problem. So that's one. And then, of course, there's a lot of the technical things on the banking reforms about how to make, how to provide better capital adequacy frameworks, right? To provide that cushion, to the banking sector to avert crises. So I think what is important, even for India and for everybody to understand, is the core objective is something else. Now, this is not the first time that political problems and geopolitical tensions have somehow cast their shadow on the core agenda of G20. If you remember, when the Paris attacks were happening, I think that particular G20 was happening in Turkey at that time. And all that agenda was somewhere hijacked, for lack of a better term, because of those attacks and what it meant for the future of immigration, etc. Now, so the thing is that this was not something that was not expected. But having said that, I think at the end, we definitely have to somewhere, as in India, definitely has to somewhere address the point that one of the core objectives that India is trying to achieve through this G20 is to emerge and remain the leader of the global South and to reinstate the dwindling faith in multilateralism, Snehesh, because of how the United Nations structure, because of the Security Council veto impasse, has not been able to deliver. So there is a lot of hope, I would say. There's a lot riding on India's shoulders because India has maintained a very painful, I would say, neutrality in this last 1 year. And all this has been done with an objective to deliver something constructive, towards the end of the G20 summit. But let's remember, this is one of the multilateral frameworks. Like I said, we have just begun, and there's a long road ahead to coming to that summit outcome document. And by then, I'm sure some consensus will emerge.
Ambassador, this is interesting because she just mentioned about India doing a lot of diplomatic heft that is at play. And this question is from Ashish Chandra. And his question is it possible, rather than being a mediator, India gets stuck and ends up being resented by every party in G20? Is it a possibility, sir?
No, I think Ashish, that's a good question. But in diplomacy, having spent 36 years, don't take these things personally. If India makes an effort, a good faith effort, then I think it is appreciated by everybody. And if it is not successful, which is what Ashish is hinting, when you say India will get stuck, that is always a possibility. And I'm sure the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister, who, by the way, I think form a dream team, actually, they perfectly understand the stakes. If we don't succeed, I think it would still be a worthwhile effort. At least we tried, because this war is now having repercussions far beyond its borders. And there is no place for sentiment in diplomacy, Ashish. That's what I would say. Nobody takes it personally. And then, by the way, if you're also hinting that there is a sense of shame, not at all. I think everybody's going to say, fine, you did a good job, you tried, you didn't work. That's absolutely fine. This is an intractable problem. It's a complex problem. And therefore, I'm still hopeful. I think I'm attracted to one of the points that Ms. Rao made, which is there is still some distance to go from now to the summit.
Yeah.
And I'm not at all convinced that they will just keep quiet. This is the first meeting.
Right.
There's a lot of time. Prime Minister can work the phones. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar can make visits. I think we will make a good faith effort. Bali was a bit of a miracle. I must be honest with you, Snehesh. When I looked at the communique and the joint statement, what is known as the leaders' declaration,
Yeah.
I was a little surprised that Russia, China went along. By the way, the other point I want to make before I forget, China doubling down on its support to Russia is interesting, because Chinese leader also went along with the 2 paragraphs in Bali. And I think the sentiment now in China is we should not leave Russia alone. So China is doubling down, whereas India is not. We are now taking, if there is one country now which is absolutely neutral, it is India. Frankly, because we are not taking sides. China now, by supporting Russia, in my view, its peace proposal is now dead on arrival, because you have demonstrated that you are partisan, and that doesn't help. So I think I'm inclined to be cautiously optimistic. We just have to wait it out, I think. Something may still emerge, who knows? 8 months, 9 months is a long time. So we just have to wait and see.
Absolutely. One will really have to wait and see what happens in the run-up to the actual summit in September. I have a question coming in from a viewer. Name is not given. With the Japanese defense budget expansion, there was a plan for a quad meeting on the side. Why did the Japanese foreign minister give G20 meet a skip, and what's the significance? For the first part, the quad meeting is going to take place. It's going to take place tomorrow. The Japanese foreign minister would be arriving here tomorrow. But what's the significance of this? I'll leave this to Ambassador and Ms. Rao to answer. Ambassador, you want to go? What is the really significance of the quad meeting, especially?
Very briefly, no significance, frankly. I mean, if there are domestic issues which are more important, that's fine. I don't think he is meant to snub anybody by not coming. I think it's just that I don't know the domestic issues because I'm not a follower of Japan. I don't know if Ms. Rao give you a better answer. But as far as I'm concerned, I can only interpret the signal to say that there is no added significance and that it is not to be construed as a snub. It can happen when you invite 20 ministers, 1 or 2 might say, okay, domestic issues are more important. That's perfectly understandable. The leaders' summit is a different ballgame. If someone can come there, then you can draw the necessary inferences, but not at this level, not in this meeting.
Not in this meeting. Ms. Rao?
Well, I'd kind of agree to what he was saying that, let's understand that Japan, like this doesn't really change Japan's official stand in any way, whether it is about the Western sanctions, like joining the Western sanction regimes against Russia, or whether retaining their stakes in the Sakhalin energy, projects, which are still on with Russia, or whether it's showing their commitment to Quad and, to Indo-Pacific. I think the official reasons that I read was something to do with their domestic, issues. And like I think the ambassador said, that it's not really meant to be read between the lines. It's absolutely fine if they didn't want to send the foreign minister or somebody here. But like you mentioned, Snehesh, that they are going ahead with the Quad, meeting tomorrow. And I think there's not really much to be read between the lines right now. Everything is just as it was.
Okay, and I have a question coming in from Simran, and the question is, how does India benefit from G20 presidentship? It goes to both of you. Ambassador.
I will let Ms. Rao answer it because I think it'll take me about 40 minutes to answer the question. I think it's fantastic what they are doing. Very briefly, I think people who don't know enough about India will know India. I expect tourism to get an impetus and a fillip. And I think the government has done a good job by making it a people's movement so that, even my chauffeur the other day was asking, so what the hell is this G20? Why am I seeing G20 everywhere? So I told him, these are the 20 most important countries in the world. And that's fine. Even if he comes to know that there is an important grouping, 20 countries, India is part of it, India is hosting it. I think that much is enough, Snehesh, but I will let Ms. Rao give you a more substantive response.
Really, that's kind of you, Ambassador Kumar. Okay, so like I said, I think to really put it into extremely direct points, I personally feel that India is looking at about 5 or 6 desiderata from its G20 engagement. Like the first one is definitely extremely important, and it lends the flavor and the tone and tenor to how we look at a G20, which is that the credibility to emerge and remain as the voice of the global South, because one of the major, I'll say the tangible, so to say, expressions of our core commitment to non-alignment is also to emerge as this, voice of the global South. And I think our commitment to that has been very consistent too. So that I think is an important thing. That is one desiderata that we'd like to, emerge as and also retain. The second, like I said, is to, it's giving us an opportunity to harness our posturing as a long-standing democracy, which is rooted in non-alignment, which is about collective, collective interest, which is about Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. So that also, that philosophical, underscoring is important because it actually shows how India understands that there are, sectarian national interests, but at the same time, there's something that can bind us all together. So that also gives one of, the clear flavors to our presidency of the G20. The third is that it is definitely giving us a platform to expand and deepen our spectrum of cooperation, not only with the West, but also with the whole host of guests that we have been inviting this year, which a lot of them are members of the Global South. We have invited countries from the Middle East, we have invited countries from South Africa, from Africa, etc. So I think that also is an important thing. From ASEAN countries, a lot of those that are not reflected in the G20. So it is about how we deepen and expand our global outreach and footprint. And this is right now, I think, in a very magnificent way, it is unfolding with very prominent European powers. As you can see, that a lot of European powers leaders have been coming and courting India. We are close to, working very constructively on a lot of stuck FTAs. So I think that is also a very, very important thing, which was not there earlier. Fourth, I think we are still remaining to be Russia's good friend, and we are trying to utilizing those ties to the best of our advantage in terms of trying to come out with a constructive bridging of the agenda in G20. And like I said, we are trying to reinstate the dwindling faith in multilateralism, which was made most evident by the decline of the UN system. So I think these are the broad ideas in which we look at G20 and our agenda. So but like Ambassador Kumar said, that otherwise it would take a separate session, for us to actually discuss why the G20 is important for India, etc. And let's also understand that this is a historic moment for those of the viewers who understand the value of the Troika, right? The presidents and how the incoming and the outgoing president, along with the one that is holding, forms the Troika, and how the G20 agenda is followed through the Troikas from one to another. That also then makes you understand why the Global South is so important, because it is for the first time that 2 consecutive Troikas are going to be held by members of the Global South. So I think those are the things which are important.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for, for explaining, various nuances of this G20 summit. And as both Ambassador Kumar as well as Ms. Rao had mentioned, that there is still time to go. We'll have to really wait and watch. It's in September that the G20 heads of state meeting summit will take place. So there's a lot built up to there. And so thank you so much, viewers, for joining in and sending in your questions. There are many more questions that are there, but we're just running short of time. Both have to leave early. So thank you so much, both of you, Ambassador Kumar as well as Ms. Rao, for joining us on this discussion. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.